So let's dive in with our first topic, theory and practice, the four pillars, Rory, of Gestalt therapy. Let's start by kind of outlining what that theory is, and then we can look at how does that come to life in the therapy room.
Yes, well, I think that the four pillars are four theoretical ideas. So if we think of them as a tabletop and the pillars being the legs, it's what holds the tabletop up. It's what holds the theory up. The first one is phenomenology, which, of course, for those people who are studying person-centered therapy, will be quite a familiar term, which, of course, is someone's experience of the world, how the individual views their world. Sometimes can be referred to as lived experience. That's phenomenology. Then we talk about the dialogical relationship, and that is usually the relationship between the therapist and the client. Field theory, that is what's going on around the client, what's happening around the client. And then finally, and this, I think this is really what kind of makes Gestalt therapy fairly unique, experimentation, where clients are encouraged or supported by the therapist to do experiments and check out if their phenomenological perception is correct or it can be altered. And those are the four pillars, Ken.
Yes. And I like phenomenology. I'm going to start there. It's kind of what is it? Is Anna, I think, is the person of this quote. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. We have our own, I guess, phenomenological way of seeing the world around us and experiencing the world around us. And I think that Gestalt, first of all, recognizes that as one of the pillars. The person, the client that is in front of you has their life and their way that they interact and see the world. And it's about recognizing that, I guess, and welcoming that in therapy. And I guess how we might see this come up is that the client may speak a truth. And it may be that for you as the therapist, that's not your truth, but it's their truth. So there we're seeing it come up, and how might we work with that, Rory? So we hold our own truth, but now a client comes in and brings what is a truth for them in their phenomenological view of the world. How might that impact us as a therapist? It might set something off in us. We might internally go, oh no, that's wrong. It's not like that. It's like this. And I think that's where we can get lost. And I guess the job is being with them in their view of that.
It is. It's about, phenomenology is about someone's worldview. And sometimes clients will bring a worldview that, people may find different to their worldview, even, offensive. I mean, they may have a view on certain types of people or certain sexualities, which may not be your view of the world. But I think that if you meet the client where they are, using empathy and curiosity and try to explore what brought them to that and help them to, they're exploring that, then we may get an understanding of how they formed their views. And through the arc of therapy, sometimes people actually change their mind. I think that's an interesting thing. We don't actually go out to change people's minds, but actually once they've said something, once it's out there, you can inspect it in the therapy room. It's like bringing something out of a locked box, isn't it? And you put it on the table and you open it up, and then you both peer into this box, and you both kind of move things about in this box and pick things up and look at them. And part of that therapeutic engagement, I think, in any therapy is about saying, well, what does this mean? What does this mean to you? What feelings does this invoke in you? Or sometimes what thoughts does this invoke in you? And sometimes during that phenomenological inquiry that therapists engage in with their clients, different meanings can be formed. So it may be that the initial meaning of something changes through the arc of therapy. And it's like, I thought it was this, but now I think it's that.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's such a beautiful explanation of that, Rory. Now, we're saying four pillars here, and we've spoken about that first pillar, that phenomenological view or phenomenology. But phenomenology would be useless. We wouldn't understand it. We wouldn't be able to understand their view on the world if we didn't enter into dialogue, which is our second area of the second pillar of Gestalt, is that dialogical relationship. And of course, dialogical, referring to there needs to be a dialogue between you as the therapist and them as the client. You're sharing that experience. You're doing exactly as you just said there, Rory. What does that bring up for you? What does that mean for you? It's looking in that box and talking about it so we can get a shared understanding.
Absolutely. And this, one of the big terms in Gestalt therapy is contact, whether it's the client's contact with themselves, their own processes, or the therapist's contact with them, contacting their phenomenological view of the world. So, for any therapist, but certainly in Gestalt, to initiate contact, you have to be present. You have to be, to some extent, vulnerable. You have to be able to see the world through the client's eyes. You have to be empathic. You may do a little bit of self-disclosure in this area, but it is about showing the humanity in yourself and allowing the client to engage with that. And that's where the contact is. It's the contact between the client's lived experience and sharing their story, and you as a therapist working with the client, and the client seeing you as an ally, someone who they can talk to and share their experiences. And crucially, the client perceives you as someone who is trying and working hard to understand their view of the world.
Yeah. I can't help but comment time and time again when we look at all the different theories, how they kind of intertwine and relate to one another. And as you're speaking, you could just as well be speaking about person-centered therapy, bar a few words in there. But they are different therapies, and I guess they're for a reason. And I'd like to share a quote just covering what you've just said. And this is from Yontef and Jacob's book, 2005, page 320. It suggests dialogue is the basis of the Gestalt therapy relationship. In dialogue, the therapist practices inclusion, empathic engagement, and personal presence, e.g., self-disclosure. And I think that that's an important point, because you mentioned that self-disclosure, and that might be where we can kind of see the paths maybe splitting from other theories where we're maybe not encouraged to self-expose. So how might that show in the therapy room with self-disclosure from the therapist's point of view? And what we don't want to be doing, I guess, is taking the spotlight onto ourselves. So if a client shares something, self-disclosure is not saying, oh, I had something similar that happened to me, let me tell you about that. That's not self-disclosure. I think self-disclosure is more appropriate where somebody brings something and you might share that you have an understanding of how that might be or feel or relate to them because of maybe a personal experience, but we wouldn't want to take the baton and say, well, that's nothing, let me tell you about what happened to me type of vibe.
No, I mean, I think the best example of that actually came from a TV program called Cold Feet, which was very popular in the 90s. And it was about one of the characters who went to visit a therapist because one of the other characters had died. And the character who was playing the client was concerned that people weren't grieving enough or grieving in the way that she believed that people should grieve. And the therapist said, it was brilliant. I have to say, it was one of the best examples of self-disclosure I've seen on a TV program. The therapist said, it seems to me that you're concerned that people aren't grieving in the same way you are. And she said, I'll share with you that when my husband had a terminal illness, we both decided that when he died, I'd go scuba diving with turtles. And it was this silence. And as a therapist watching it, it was like, wow, not saying that's what you should do, but that's my experience of grief. And what you're saying is that other people are experiencing it different, and almost inciting a permission to say, I can grieve in the way I want to grieve.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm liking this. I'm liking it. We're now going to go on to that third leg. And they're not in particular order, but it's field theory. And so we're recognizing the phenomenology. We're involved in dialogue. We have that dialogical relationship. We're now looking at field theory. We have to recognize, I guess, or that the life the person is leading their day to day, what's going on for them is going to influence who they are, what they bring at the time that you're speaking with them.
Absolutely. And within Gestalt, there's three types of field. There's the experiential field, in other words, the phenomenological reality of the client. There's the relational field, and how the therapeutic relationship and the therapist engages with the client. And then there's the wider field, and that wider field can be things that are happening outside the therapy room with different people. And I think crucially, not just on the client side, when as therapists, we have to be aware of what's going on in our own lives and try and bracket that within the relationship. And there's a term sometimes used called shuttling. I love that word, shuttling, like moving very short trips across these three fields. And we may find ourselves, in the relational field, or we may find ourselves in the wider field, talking about things externally to the client, or we may find ourselves in the relational field where we have to hold a relationship and really be empathic and really try to connect with the client so that we can support them and build that trust, because that's what the therapeutic relationship is. It's all about trust, and it's flexible, and it's a constant flux. It's a constant movement.
Yeah. And I guess maybe an example in practice, and an example of the time we find ourselves in at the moment, where prices are going up, fuel prices are going up at the time of making this podcast. Inflation is very high. People's mortgage rates are going up, and that is an external field that can have an impact on a lot of people. I'm certainly feeling it myself, and you may very well see that presenting as part of the person's presentation in therapy, and recognizing those different fields, Rory.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm moving across them. I think that it's about pacing is quite an important part, I think, in Gestalt. Making sure that you're in the same place as the client. It's a bit like tennis. Tennis as you playing in a rectangle with a net in the middle, and there's different areas, and you bat the ball, if that's the word. Please, no letters in the postcard. batting the ball. And hit the bat with one's racket, I think, is probably the correct expression. And within that, you move around, and for that relational ball, the therapy, to keep in play, because I'm really stretching the metaphors here, Ken, you have to move around the different areas of the pitch. And I guess that's a good way of thinking of that the field is literally a good example. It's a field. You're playing within a pitch, and you're moving around those different areas to keep the therapeutic ball in play.
Yeah. So that field theory. And then, of course, we go on to the fourth pillar, or the fourth leg holding up the table that is Gestalt underpinning, and that is experimentation. And this is an interesting part. And here again, I guess it's where maybe the split in the road comes from other theories. So person-centered, we would not be working with experimentation. But Gestalt is known for experimentation. And of course, the empty chair is like a very well-known example of that, Rory.
It is. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this may use empty chair. And for those of you who are maybe new to this, what is empty chair? Well, say, for instance, you have a client who has unfinished business with a former partner they've not seen for a long time. What you would do is, if the client agreed to it, it would have to be contracted. It's not something for early work in therapy. I think it's something when the client's settled in and the client knows the way that you work, and trust has been built. You could say to the client, well, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to sit in your chair. I'm going to put an empty chair in front of you. And I'm going to ask you to imagine that your ex-partner sat in that chair. And what do you want to say to them? And it's a way of allowing someone to speak the unsaid. They can say that to them. And, sometimes, you can interject and say, what do you think he or she may say back to you? And how would you respond to that? And what happens is it's a way of, within Gestalt, it's all about contact, not only with the client and the therapist, but internal contact with oneself, the client making contact with disconnected parts of themselves. And part of that is to form that contact. And it's encouraged. And even you could even say there's a little bit of CBT element in that. It might be someone says, I'm a bit worried about going to a party and standing talking to people, and say, well, why not try it out? Just see how it goes. Come back and tell me how it goes.
Yeah.
And then you could do a debrief. And you're absolutely right, Ken. It is it does make Gestalt stand out a little bit more than say person-centered therapy, because it's a more active, directive approach, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And those experiments can be incredibly powerful. One example that springs to mind for myself is maybe working with a client, and the client has experienced a loss, or somebody is around that they have unfinished business with, but maybe that person has passed away, and then there's no way of contacting them or getting to them. So the empty chair is one way of doing that, which is quite verbal, and it's in the room, maybe with the therapist, but a private and more, I guess, secluded activity or experiment would be write the person a letter telling them what you might want to tell them. And as the therapist doesn't even need to see the letter, just the process of the client writing what they want to say to this person down on a letter, and then they can burn that letter and send it to that person, or kind of just bring it to completion, which is what Gestalt is about. Gestalt means whole. It's German. It's Gestalt, whole, completion. The theory suggests that many of us have uncompleted elements of our lives, and we're looking for that completion. Maybe I think of myself of what I would like to have said to my dad that I didn't say to my dad. Before losing him. And I can do that by writing a letter and burning that letter and sending it to him. And it brings maybe a little bit of completion there. But those experiments can be so, so powerful. And I guess that keys into who that client is. What is their preferred communication method? Maybe they don't want to speak verbally. Maybe they just want to think about it or experience it. So it's very inclusive, I feel, Rory.
It is very inclusive, and I guess one of the reasons that Gestalt therapists take a long time in training is that there's lots of moving parts in Gestalt, and I think it's especially worth mentioning that we've touched on the 4 pillars of Gestalt, but Gestalt is so much more than that. It's about, as you say, completing the circle. There's no real direct translation for Gestalt from the German to the English, but most people would say it's a completion. It's sometimes referred to as homeostasis. And an example of that would be, I feel thirsty, I go to the tap, I turn the tap on, I fill the glass with a drink, I put the glass to my mouth, I drink, I'm no longer thirsty, and that homeostasis is complete. And what happens is that there are parts where emotionally we've not picked the glass up. So for instance, we've not said the unsaid, as you've said, or written that letter, as you said about your dad. And what happens is that then allows us to disconnect contact with ourselves. And we're missing parts of ourselves. And the whole point of Gestalt therapy is to connect not just emotionally to ourselves, but physically as well, because the emotional has a physical reaction.
Yeah, I like how you said that this is really a one drop in the ocean that is Gestalt therapy.
Yes.
Is incredibly deep, the theory. And we've created a handout. Rory created one of his super duper handouts for you on the 4 pillars of Gestalt therapy. And you can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. That is our mother website. Click on the podcast tab. Make your way to episode 251. Right there on that page, you can download your super duper handout on the 4 pillars of Gestalt therapy. So there it is. That is our theory in practice for today.